Birmingham, England, 1978. The second largest city in England and known for being the first manufacturing town in the world. Affectionately named the City of 1,000 Trades due to the high number of trades and businesses based in the city. Birmingham is also home to the infamous Spaghetti Junction, and just over a mile away from Spaghetti Junction, northeast of central Birmingham, is the district of Erdington, postcodes B23 and B24. And in 1978, it was home to 13-year-old Candice Williams. On July the 24th, 1978, after getting into an argument with her sisters and friends in her local park named Perry Common Park, 13-year-old Candice Williams stormed off and was never seen alive again. This is the story of how it took 14 years to finally catch her killer. Candice Williams was born on the 20th of June 1965 and was the second eldest of 5 siblings who were Gina, Rupert, Wendy and Boris. Candice's mother had died in May 1978, just 2 months before what would be Candice's brutal murder, leaving the 5 children in the care of their father, Jamaican-born Robert Williams. Candice had attended Prince Albert Primary School in Aston, 3 miles away from her home, and after primary school she attended Paget Road Senior School in Pipe's Erdington. Candice, who lived on Montpellier Road in Erdington, was described as a very beautiful girl who many of the local boys in her area had a crush on, but she was said to have been dating a local boy named Darren. Candice loved to dance and was a fan of reggae music. On the afternoon of July the 24th, 1978, after a lunch of fish and chips, Candice went with her 2 sisters, 10-year-old Wendy Williams and 15-year-old Gina Williams, to Perry Common Park. They were accompanied by their friend, 14-year-old Cheryl Griffiths, and Cheryl's 7-year-old twin sisters, Anna and Paula. After a while of playing on the park equipment, Candice's older sister, 15-year-old Gina Williams, had told Candice several times to get off the seesaw and let younger sister Wendy Williams, 10, have a go. Candice got upset and angry about this and jumped off the seesaw and ran out of the park gate. She was never seen alive by her family again. That night, when Candice had not come home, her father Robert tried contacting her friends and knocking on doors, but with no luck he contacted the police. Almost 24 hours after Candice's disappearance, 64-year-old Arthur Poulton had decided to sweep the stairs of Wiley House, which was a block of flats for elderly residents on Bleak Hill Road in Erdington, one of which he lived in. When Arthur Poulton made his way up to the 12th floor landing, which was located between the 12th floor and the locked roof door, he made a horrific discovery. Wiley Tower had 12 floors, and the lift only went up to the 11th floor, as the 12th floor landing was a secluded area. It was there on the secluded 12th floor landing that 64-year-old Arthur Poulton found the body of 13-year-old Candice Williams. She had been brutally raped and strangled to death with her own shoelaces and the sleeve of her cardigan. Evidence found that 13-year-old Candice had fought fiercely for her life. Candice's underwear was found strewn at the front of the block of flats. 2 days after the murder, Candice's grief-stricken father, 41-year-old Robert Williams, retraced the last steps his daughter had taken. Mr. Williams did this while holding the hand of his young son Boris. They went to Perry Common Park and then on to Wiley Tower. At the post-mortem, semen swabs were taken from the sperm found on Candice's body, but as DNA testing was in its infancy, nothing could be done with the semen samples, so they were frozen for future evidence. A mobile incident room was set up in the park where Candice was last seen alive, and following the news of her murder, the biggest manhunt Birmingham had ever seen at the time was launched, with over 7,000 door-to-door inquiries, 3,000 interviews, 1,000 written statements, and a police inquiry line that had been set up was flooded with dozens of calls. One inquiry located a local greengrocer who owned the Golden Cross Greengrocers on Turpitts Lane, just 100 yards from Perry Common, where 13-year-old Candice was last seen. The greengrocer recalled that he saw a young black girl stood outside the shop, waiting for a young man who had entered the greengrocers and bought 2 peaches between the hours of 3 p.m. and 4 p.m. The greengrocer described the young man as a white male, smartly dressed and well-spoken, of around 20 years of age or younger. He was of slim build, with short hair, and wore a checked sports jacket and a light-coloured trousers. Forensic scientists discovered that Candice's stomach contents revealed that she had eaten a peach shortly before she was murdered. At around 3:30 p.m. and 4:15 p.m. on the day of Candice's disappearance and murder, a man of a similar description to the man who the greengrocer had described was seen going into the rear of the same block of flats that Candice's body had been discovered in. Candice's father told reporters, "You go to bed and you cry, and you pretend that when you wake up in the mornings you'll find it was all a mistake and Candice is still with us. But she's not, just her murder is. Nothing will bring her back, but your knowledge could save another child going the same way." On Friday the 26th of January 1979, 6 months and 2 days after her murder, 13-year-old Candice was buried at Witton Cemetery. Following her murder, Birmingham newspaper, the Evening Mail, offered a £500 reward for anyone who could give any information leading to the arrest of Candice's killer. The reward was matched by a local anonymous Midland businessman, a paper merchant, taking the total reward to £1,000. The businessman stated that he had a daughter and could not sit back and do nothing when he heard of the murder, and that the man must be caught. Within weeks, another businessman from Warsaw had donated another £500, taking the total reward amount to £1,500. The retired businessman stated that he had 2 granddaughters the same age as Candice, and he was disgusted by the crime and wanted the killer caught, so the more money offered, the more incentive there would be for people to come forward with information. But with no significant leads or witnesses, the case grew cold. As police started looking for suspects, they honed in on a Sutton Coldfield car salesman named John Cannon, who in 1988 was given 3 life sentences for the murder, rape and kidnap of Shirley Banks, a 30-year-old factory manager. Police were honing in on suspects who had committed similar crimes in the area, and in 1968, at age just 14, John Cannon had attacked and raped a woman in a phone box in Erdington. John Cannon denied the allegations. Also on police's radar was Patrick Hassett, who also had convictions of similar sexual crimes against women and children in the area. Hassett was questioned by police, but denied any knowledge or involvement in the murder. He also had an alibi provided for him by his girlfriend, so due to lack of evidence, he was released. It would be 18 months after Candice's brutal rape and murder that police finally got a break in the case. In January 1980, Pamela Bradbury, the alleged girlfriend of Patrick Hassett, who was one of the suspects, contacted police saying she would not provide an alibi for Hassett as she suspected him of the murder. Pamela Bradbury went on to say that Hassett had come home on the night of the murder with scratches all over his neck and that he had shaved off his moustache. Patrick Hassett was arrested and questioned, but again denied any knowledge of the murder, and due to lack of evidence, he was released for a second time. With all leads dried up, and due to any lack of any evidence, the case grew cold for another 12 years. In November 1987, the case for the murder of Candice Williams was reopened, and in 1988, with advancements in DNA technology, tests were conducted on the semen swabs that were found on Candice's body and frozen 10 years earlier. But detectives would have to wait a further 3 years for a match because prime suspect Patrick Hassett refused to give a sample for DNA testing. At this time, Patrick Hassett was currently in prison, serving time for rapes and attacks on other women and children, and upon his release for those crimes from Wakefield Prison on the 20th of February 1991, he was rearrested on the day he walked out of the prison gates. Patrick Hassett was bailed and told to come back to the police station on the 14th of March 1991 for DNA voluntarily, which he did, which surprised police as they expected him to go on the run. A single strand of hair recovered from the crime scene 13 years earlier matched the DNA of Patrick Hassett, tying him to the crime scene. At the time of Candice's murder, 13 years earlier, Birmingham forensic expert Dr. Nick France had been the forensic doctor that had collected the semen samples of Candice's body and frozen them for future forensics. Then in 1991, 14 years later, when DNA technology had advanced, forensic expert Dr. Mark Webster analysed those samples and determined that the 4 separate tests carried out on the frozen semen samples had all pointed to the DNA belonging to Patrick Hassett being the killer. Patrick Hassett was rearrested, and this time he was charged with the murder of 13-year-old Candice Williams. Forensics determined that the odds of the DNA belonging to someone else was a 1 in 30,000 chance. During his trial, it was revealed that whilst incarcerated at Winson Green Prison, Birmingham, Patrick Hassett had bragged to a fellow inmate about how he had killed a girl in the top of a block of flats. A senior detective stated,
Patrick Hassett flies into uncontrollable rages and enjoys beating girls.
Candice's father thanked police for their persistence in finding the killer. He said, I thank the officers for working so hard and long to catch the killer who killed my daughter. I've spent days, weeks and months wondering who killed her. I even wondered if it was one of my friends. My entire family has rallied round. On the 18th of March 1992, Patrick Hassett was jailed for life for the murder of Candice Williams, with a recommendation that he serve at least 14 years, meaning that he had no chance of being released until at least the year 2006. In the year 1999, 7 years after being jailed and 7 years shy of his recommended minimum tariff, Patrick Hassett failed in a bid for a retrial, stating that the DNA evidence was not safe to be used as evidence in a court trial. But this went against him, as with new DNA advances, the odds of the DNA retrieved at the scene of the crime were proved to be greater odds against anyone other than him being the killer. After Hassett's failed bid for a retrial, Candice's younger sister Wendy told reporters, "There has never been any doubt in the family's mind that he is a murderer. I hope he rots in prison for what he did to Candice." In 2016, 38 years after the brutal murder of Candice and 10 years after his minimum tariff had ended, Patrick Hassett was still in prison, in a maximum security Category A prison, and he had applied to the courts to be downgraded to a lower security prison and out of maximum security. But the courts refused due to his previous crimes of kidnap and assault on a 28-year-old woman, abducting a 14-year-old girl on her way home from school and attempting to kidnap her in his van, indecently assaulting 2 children when he was just a 12-year-old boy, amongst a host of other crimes, and because he still denies the offence. Patrick Hassett was told he still poses a risk and could carry out new sex attacks if released. Lord Justice Sales dismissed this case, stating that 2 psychology reports suggest he is still a threat to society, with one of the psychologists saying that he will strike again if released. Patrick Hassett was also denied permission to fight in the Supreme Court. Following the verdict, Candice's older sister Gina Lewis said, "He should stay exactly where he is. That is where he should stay. for the rest of his life. Till this day, 44 years after the brutal rape and murder of Candice Williams, and 30 years after being convicted, Patrick Hassett remains behind bars in a maximum security prison